Hello viewers, welcome to my YouTube channel where stories come alive. Don't forget to subscribe. Let's begin.
The pot roast had been in the oven since noon. I remember that detail clearly because it was the smell that greeted me when I came home from work that evening, rich, herby, warm. The kind of smell that makes a house feel like a home. My wife, Dana, had spent the entire afternoon cooking. She'd set the table with the good china, the plates her grandmother had left her, the ones we only brought out for Thanksgiving and Christmas and occasions that deserved to be remembered. Her sister, Renee, was coming to dinner. I should have known, even then, that any occasion involving Renee was one that would be remembered, just not for the reasons anyone hoped. Dana and Renee had always had a complicated relationship, the kind that forms between sisters who are close in age but miles apart in temperament. Dana was steady, careful, thoughtful. She was a project manager at a logistics company, the kind of person who made lists and kept them, who thought before she spoke, who loved deeply and quietly. Renee was her opposite, impulsive, dramatic, always at the center of some swirling storm of her own creation. She was beautiful in a way that she'd learned to weaponize early, and she'd spent most of her adult life bouncing between disasters and expecting the people around her to clean them up. I had never trusted Renee. That's the truth, and I won't dress it up. There was something behind her eyes when she looked at me, a calculation, a measurement that always made me feel like I was being sized up for something I hadn't agreed to. I'd mentioned it to Dana once, carefully, and Dana had sighed and said, "That's just Renee. She's like that with everyone. Let it go. You let a lot of things go when you love someone." Renee arrived at 7:40 minutes late, with a bottle of wine she'd clearly opened in the car and an energy that crackled like a down power line. She hugged Dana too long and me not at all, which I didn't mind. We sat down. We ate. For a while it was almost normal, Dana asking about Renee's new apartment, Renee half answering, refilling her glass twice before the rest of us had finished our first. Then somewhere between the main course and dessert, Renee set down her fork. She looked at me. And she said, "I'm pregnant, and Marcus is the father." Room didn't go silent so much as it went hollow. I watched Dana's face. That's the thing I'll never be able to unsee, the way my wife's face moved through surprise, confusion, and then something that cracked open in a place I'd never seen cracked before. Her eyes went to mine, and I saw her searching, desperate, looking for something to hold on to. "That's a lie," I said. My voice came out steadier than I felt. "Dana, that is an absolute lie." Didn't flinch. That was what terrified me. She'd rehearsed this. She laid out a story with the practiced ease of someone who had built it brick by brick over weeks, dates, times, a hotel she named, details that were specific enough to sound real. She said it had been going on for 4 months. She said she was sorry. She said she'd tried to stay quiet, but she couldn't, not now, not with a baby involved. Dana stood up. She didn't yell. She didn't throw anything. She just stood up, walked to the bedroom, and closed the door. That quiet was worse than any scream. I turned to Renee. "Why are you doing this?" She looked at me with those calculating eyes and said, very softly, "You should have been nicer to me." I slept on the couch that night, or tried to. Dana had locked the bedroom door, and I sat in the dark of my own living room listening to the sound of my marriage, possibly ending on the other side of a wall. And I tried to understand how the world had tilted so completely in the space of one dinner. Renee had left after Dana retreated, not with guilt, but with a kind of satisfied composure that made my skin crawl. I'd called her a liar to her face. She'd smiled and said the paternity test would prove everything. A paternity test. She was prepared for that. She'd thought of everything. The next morning, Dana came out of the bedroom with her bag packed. She didn't look at me when she said she was going to her mother's. She said she needed time to think. She said she wasn't ready to hear my side yet because she needed her own ground to stand on before she could stand next to me. I said, "Dana, I have never touched your sister, not once, not ever." She paused at the door. She didn't turn around. She said, "I know you believe that." And then she left. I spent 3 days in a fog. I went to work. I came home. I sat in the apartment that smelled like pot roast and ruined evenings, and I turned the situation over and over looking for the edge I could grab onto. How do you prove a negative? How do you demonstrate the absence of something, an affair that never happened? A relationship that existed only in one woman's fabrication. The answer, I decided, was to stop playing defense and start asking questions. I called a friend of mine, Derek, who worked in HR and had a sharp eye for inconsistency. I told him everything. He listened without interrupting, which is a rare skill, and when I finished he said, "The hotel. Start with the hotel." Renee had named a specific hotel, the Marylton downtown, on a Thursday in November. She'd been precise about it, too precise, I now realized, in the way that liars sometimes overdetail their stories to compensate for their falseness. I went to the Marylton. I didn't have a legal right to their records, but I knew someone who did: my cousin Paul, a paralegal who understood what a properly worded formal request could accomplish. It took 5 days. When the records came back, they showed no reservation under my name, no charge to any card I owned, no record of my presence. It proved nothing definitively, of course. Renee could claim we'd used cash, used a different name, but it was a thread and I pulled it. The second thread came from an unexpected direction. One of Renee's friends, a woman named Sylvia who had known both sisters since college, sent me a message on a Tuesday afternoon. I almost didn't open it, assuming it would be another volley in whatever campaign Renee was running. But the subject line stopped me. It said, "I think you deserve to know the truth." I called Sylvia that evening. She was nervous, speaking in the careful tones of someone doing something they know is right but still find frightening. She told me that Renee had been in a relationship for the past 6 months with a man named Cal, a married man, older, who had made clear from the beginning that he had no intention of leaving his wife. She told me Renee had fallen harder than she'd intended, had found out she was pregnant, and had panicked when Cal refused to acknowledge the child. She needed someone to blame, Sylvia said, someone who couldn't easily disprove it. She talked about you. She knew you and Dana were solid, that you'd been faithful, that there was no history anyone could point to. She thought a solid man with no dirt on him was actually easier to accuse because people would think, why would she make that up? I sat with that for a long moment. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. Sylvia was quiet. Then, "Because I have a sister too, and if someone was doing this to her husband, I'd want someone to tell me." I went to Dana. I didn't call first. I drove to her mother's house, rang the doorbell, and when Dana opened the door, I held up my phone with Sylvia's contact pulled up and I said, "Please, 1 hour. That's all I'm asking." She let me in. I laid out everything: the hotel records, Sylvia's account, the timeline that placed Renee deep in a relationship with Cal during the exact period she was claiming to have been involved with me. I watched Dana read through the records. I watched her listen to the voicemail Sylvia had agreed to leave for exactly this purpose. I watched my wife's face move through something complicated and private. When she finally looked up, her eyes were wet. "I wanted to believe you," she said. "I want you to know that. Even that first night there was a part of me that knew, but she's my sister." "I know," I said. "She's my sister," and she looked me in the eyes and, "I know." Dana pressed her hands flat on the table. She breathed. She said, "I need to talk to her." What happened between Dana and Renee over the following days is something I know only in pieces. Dana told me some of it, and the rest I filled in from context, and the long silences that sometimes fell over my wife when she looked out windows. Renee, confronted with the hotel records and Sylvia's account, didn't confess immediately. She pivoted and deflected and tried new angles, the way someone does when they've built a story so tall they can't see the ground anymore. But Dana is not a woman who can be easily redirected once she's locked onto the truth, and eventually the architecture of the lie couldn't hold. Renee admitted that Cal was the father. She admitted that she'd chosen me because I was, in her words, safe. A faithful husband with nothing to hide. She'd calculated that Dana might leave me, that I'd have no easy way to prove my innocence, and that by the time the truth emerged, if it did, she'd have had time to figure out her next move. What she hadn't calculated was Sylvia. What she hadn't calculated was a wife who, even in her darkest doubt, couldn't fully let go of 18 years of knowing her husband. Dana came home on a Thursday evening. She didn't make a speech. She didn't arrive with apologies pre-packaged and delivered. She just came through the door, set down her bag, and stood in the kitchen for a moment looking at the room, the table, the chairs, the ordinary furniture of the life we'd built. Then she turned to me and said, "I'm sorry I left without hearing you out." I told her she didn't have to apologize, that in her position, blindsided at her own dinner table by her own sister, doubt was human. She shook her head. "You needed me to stand next to you, and I walked out the door." We talked for a long time that night. Not just about Renee, about the fears that Renee's accusation had unlocked, the questions Dana had sat with alone in her childhood bedroom, the grief she felt not just about what had been done to me, but about what it meant to finally see her sister clearly. There is a particular sorrow in removing your illusions about someone you love. It doesn't feel like clarity at first. It feels like loss. Renee moved away from the city 8 months later after the baby was born. A boy. Cal, as expected, remained absent. The last I heard, Renee was in another state, starting over, which seemed both like the right thing for everyone and like a pattern that would repeat until she decided to break it. I don't know if Dana and Renee will ever find their way back to something functional. The calls are rare now. The holidays complicated. Dana grieves it in the small, quiet way she grieves things. Not all at once, but in moments when she sees sisters together in public, or when her mother asks carefully about Renee over the phone. What I know is this. The night that was supposed to destroy my marriage didn't, not because the accusation wasn't serious, not because doubt didn't do its damage, but because the truth is stubborn and marriage, when it's the right one, is sturdier than one terrible dinner. I still think about the pot roast. The good china, the smell of a house that felt like home. Some nights, Dana and I sit at that same table, the same plates, the same chairs, and we eat quietly. And sometimes one of us will say nothing in particular and the other will understand everything. That's 18 years. That's what survives. That's what Renee, for all her calculation, failed to account for. She didn't know us as well as she thought.